I knew something was deeply wrong. The second I stepped into the glass atrium of Archon Financial, and the receptionist refused to make eye contact with me. Her pupils were glued to a minor hairline crack in the polished marble desk, as if looking at me directly might infect her with whatever corporate virus was floating through executive suites. I had not even placed my leather briefcase down on my desk when an urgent calendar invitation flashed across my phone screen. Performance review. 9:15 in the morning, conference room 4C. The subject line was typed entirely in capital letters without an agenda, body text, or standard signature line. To understand the absurdity of this moment, you have to understand where Archon Financial stood in the market. I had just driven 12 consecutive quarters of record growth for the firm. 12 consecutive quarters without a single financial misstep or client departure. Less than 3 weeks prior, I single-handedly structured and closed the landmark Hastings acquisition, a deal projected to deliver $28 million in clear revenue over the next 3 years. I had drafted the foundation of that massive deal on a paper napkin during an overnight flight back from Chicago. Yet here I was, getting summoned to a blind last-minute evaluation like an entry-level associate suspected of stealing office supplies. When you have spent over 2 decades in high-stakes corporate finance, you develop a subtle, undeniable sixth sense. It is a sharp prickle at the base of your neck that alerts you when the corporate vultures begin to assemble in the shadows. Right then, my neck was burning. As I walked down the executive corridor, Supervisor Valerie Thorne had her office door cracked open by 2 inches. She was whispering into her phone with that hollow performative tone she always adopted whenever she prepared to eliminate someone's position. It was the exact same artificial warmth she used when she informed our former accounting director that his role had evolved beyond his scope, which in corporate doublespeak simply meant they had replaced his 20 years of experience with a 22-year-old nephew of a board member. Instead of rushing directly to conference room 4C, I took a deliberate detour through the building. It was not out of hesitation or fear, but cold tactical calculation. I gave myself 4 extra minutes to maintain my composure, observe the floor, and note who among my colleagues was actively avoiding my line of sight. Several department heads turned away abruptly as I approached. Seth Miller, a senior analyst whom I had personally mentored for 5 years, literally ducked into the copy room to avoid speaking to me. That was all the confirmation I needed. The execution was already scheduled and approved. I slipped into my private office, locked the heavy oak door, and opened the concealed safe behind my bookcase. Inside lay the original hard copy of my executive employment agreement. 8 detailed pages of binding legalese, 3 of which I had personally renegotiated during our Q4 board session the previous year. I flipped directly to page 6, locating clause 11C. I ran my thumb over the crisp blue ink signatures at the bottom of the page. Valerie Thorne's initials were right next to CEO Gavin Henderson's, alongside my own. It was right there, pristine and untouched. My contractual parachute, my legal wire, my personal insurance against the exact amateur hour betrayal I was about to face. I folded the document smoothly, placed it inside my leather folder, adjusted my tie in the mirror, and stepped back into the hallway. When I reached conference room 4C, the frosted glass blinds were already drawn tight. Inside, Valerie Thorne sat at the end of the long mahogany table alongside HR manager Sandra Croft. Both of them looked as though they had swallowed broken glass. There were no laptops open, no water carafes on the table, and no performance metric folders prepared. There was no actual review scheduled for this room. There was a corporate guillotine waiting for its prompt. "Julian," Valerie said, her voice dripping with artificial regret and rehearsed sympathy. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." "Of course, Valerie," I replied calmly, taking a standing position opposite her executive chair. "I always make time for corporate leadership priorities." Neither of them smiled. Sandra Croft pushed a single sheet of paper toward my side of the table. It was a pre-printed notice of termination. Valerie cleared her throat, adjusting her designer blazer. "I will get right to the point. Due to strategic realignment and organizational restructuring across our division, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." This decision is final, approved by executive leadership and non-negotiable. By executive leadership, she meant CEO Gavin Henderson, who did not even possess the courage to deliver the news himself. I looked down at the document, then back up at Valerie. I did not flinch, protest, or raise my voice. Understood, I said softly. Valerie blinked in visible confusion. She had undoubtedly expected a hysterical outburst, a desperate plea, or at least an immediate threat of litigation. She had no idea who she was truly dealing with in this corporate environment. "We will need your security clearance badge and corporate keys immediately," Sandra Croft added nervously. I unclipped my gold badge, laid it quietly on top of the paper, and smiled politely. "Thank you both for your time." Just like that, after a decade of building Archon Financial's core revenues, I was officially unseated. But what Valerie Thorne and Gavin Henderson failed to realize was that firing me 24 hours before my multi-million-dollar equity bonus vested did not save the firm a single dollar. Instead, it detonated Clause 11C, an airtight contractual mechanism that doubled their financial liability and exposed the company to immense legal exposure. I exited Conference Room 4C with the serene composure of a man heading out for a quiet lunch. Valerie Thorne remained seated inside, likely wiping sweat from her brow and congratulating herself on a seamless termination. Sandra Croft sat motionless, holding my security badge as if waiting for the room to return to normal. They expected me to gather my personal items in a cardboard box under HR escort and walk out the front entrance in shame. That is how standard corporate executions usually conclude. You build an empire for a corporation, they rent your intellect, and the moment your compensation threatens their quarterly margins, they toss you aside without a second thought. However, I had no intention of following their script. Instead of taking the main elevator down to the underground parking garage, I stepped into the private executive lift and pressed the button for floor 45, the headquarters of corporate legal and compliance. I had spent countless late nights on 45 while structuring the Hastings acquisition, and I knew precisely who understood the true weight of binding contract law. I walked past the polished wood panels of the legal reception area and dropped my leather portfolio onto the front desk. "Please, tell Nora Bennett that Julian Vance is here to see her," I said calmly to the assistant. The young assistant looked up, startled. "Do you have a scheduled appointment on her calendar?" "I just received an immediate termination notice," I replied with a calm smile. "She will definitely want to see me right now." Nora Bennett was a brilliant associate counsel who had assisted me during the Hastings contract negotiations. She was incredibly sharp, meticulously detailed, and possessed an impeccable memory for statutory compliance. 3 years ago, she had asked me whether she should leave corporate practice for a private law firm. I told her to stay long enough to learn where corporate entities bury their liabilities and who holds the shovel. 10 seconds after the assistant called her desk, Nora opened her office door and motioned for me to come inside. She closed the door firmly behind us, looking at me with genuine concern. "Julian, what is going on? Word is already leaking on 38 that HR pulled your access. They eliminated my role effective immediately." I explained, leaning against her desk. "No cause cited, standard baseline severance offered, and zero mention of my incentive equity schedule." Nora frowned deeply, her legal instincts immediately triggering. "Your equity schedule? You were set to vest your primary performance bonus tomorrow at noon." "Exactly," I said. I opened my portfolio, pulled out the employment agreement, and turned directly to page 6. "Read Clause 11C, Paragraph 3, Subsection Alpha." Nora pulled the document toward her, scanning the lines quickly before rereading them with intense focus. As her eyes traversed the text, her composure shifted dramatically. She took off her reading glasses, leaned back in her leather chair, and looked at me in disbelief. "Julian," she whispered, running her finger under the initialed margins, "you added this specific wording during the Q4 renegotiation last December?" I nodded. Gavin Henderson and Valerie Thorne initialed every single page. Gavin even asked me why I insisted on inserting the accelerated multiplier phrasing. I told him it was standard transitional protection in the event of strategic displacement. He signed it without a second thought because he assumed he would never need to read it again. Nora let out a breathy, stunned laugh. This language is absolute ironclad steel. Under Clause 11C, any involuntary termination executed without documented cause within 24 hours prior to a scheduled equity vesting date triggers immediate, full equity acceleration. Furthermore, it applies a 2x multiplier on the unvested bonus value, adds 50% of your annual base salary, and mandates full legal fee indemnity if contested. That is correct, I replied smoothly, and it does not stop there. Valerie Thorne signed the formal implementation memorandum approving this exact addendum. I have the digital PDF file with her verified metadata, timestamped, notarized, and archived across 3 secure external locations. Furthermore, this abrupt dismissal without 60 days advance notification directly violates statutory requirements under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, codified under Title 2029 United States Code, Section 2101. Nora shook her head, her face pale. They thought they could execute a last-minute firing to evade a $4 million payout. They believed that terminating your contract prior to the vesting hour nullified the firm's financial obligation. But the termination itself is the precise event that activates the accelerated payout clause. They did not prevent the obligation, Julian. They doubled it. I am not here to vent or seek emotional retribution, Nora, I stated clearly. I am here for strict contractual enforcement. She nodded slowly, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Do you want me to escalate this file directly to Lead General Counsel Audrey Montgomery? I would prefer if it came from your desk. Quietly at first, I answered. You understand the internal mechanics of this department. I want the realization of their error to unfold from within their own compliance structure. Nora immediately placed the document on her high-speed scanner, generating high-resolution digital copies and securing the verified original back in my portfolio. As I stood up to leave her office, she looked at me with newfound admiration. They thought they were walking you out the door, Julian, she said softly. They walked into a legal minefield of their own creation, I replied. Before leaving the legal floor, I made one additional stop at the end of the concourse. Sitting in a quiet corner cubicle surrounded by stacks of compliance registries was Audrey Montgomery, the firm's formidable lead general counsel. Audrey was a veteran attorney with 30 years of corporate litigation experience. She was known throughout the industry for her razor-sharp mind and complete intolerance for executive sloppiness. I knocked gently on her glass partition. Audrey, do you have 2 minutes? She looked up from her monitor, her sharp eyes scanning my face. Julian, I heard a rumor 2 minutes ago that HR initiated a restructuring action on your division. They did, I said, setting a duplicate set of scanned papers on her desk. And before Valerie Thorne tries to file an altered termination report, I thought you should review the binding terms of Clause 11C. Audrey picked up the papers, putting on her gold-rimmed spectacles. She read the first paragraph, and I watched as the color gradually drained from her face. While I was quietly securing my legal documentation on floor 45, chaos was erupting inside the Human Resources War Room on floor 38. Valerie Thorne burst through the double doors without knocking, her silk blouse stained with sweat at the collar and her voice trembling with rising anxiety. She slammed her tablet onto the conference table where HR manager Sandra Croft was working. "We need to establish cause right now," Valerie demanded, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "Find something in his file. An undocumented verbal warning, a late report, an expense discrepancy, an employee conflict. Anything." Sandra Croft stared at her in utter disbelief, her fingers hovering motionless over her keyboard. "Valerie, Julian has spent 10 years at this firm with a flawless record. He has 12 consecutive quarters of top-tier performance ratings. He closed the Hastings acquisition 3 weeks ago. There is not a single disciplinary entry, written warning, or performance flag in his entire employment history. His file is immaculate." Valerie began pacing frantically across the room, her high heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. "There has to be something. You do not understand." He walked out of 4C with a smile on his face. He did not yell, he did not argue, he did not even ask about severance. People do not react like that unless they know something we do not. Before Sandra could respond, the internal telephone on the conference room table rang loudly. Sandra pressed the speaker button, Sandra, this is legal compliance. Nora Bennett's voice came through crisp and clear. Please be advised that Lead General Counsel Audrey Montgomery has issued an immediate litigation hold on all records, communications, and digital files pertaining to senior strategist Julian Vance. You are instructed to freeze his profile and preserve all contract metadata effective immediately. Do not alter, edit, or upload any post-termination documentation. Valerie's face turned completely white. She lunged forward and slammed her hand down on the disconnect button, cutting off the line. What did legal just say? Valerie whispered, her voice barely audible. Down the hall in the executive suite, CEO Gavin Henderson was pouring himself a glass of scotch, completely oblivious to the hurricane gathering over his head. He believed he had executed a masterclass in corporate cost reduction. By eliminating my position 24 hours before my $4 million performance bonus vested, he planned to present a $4 million net savings to the board of directors at the upcoming quarterly meeting, solidifying his performance metrics and securing his own executive incentive package. His office door swung open unceremoniously, and Lead General Counsel Audrey Montgomery walked in, holding my employment addendum in her hand. She did not ask for permission to enter, nor did she acknowledge his casual posture. Gavin, Audrey said, her tone colder than Arctic ice. Did you personally sign this employment addendum with Julian Vance last December? Gavin leaned back in his leather chair, taking a slow sip of scotch. Audrey, calm down. If this is about Vance's termination, HR handled it this morning. Standard restructuring. We eliminated the role to streamline operational overhead. Audrey walked over to his mahogany desk, placed the document directly over his glass of scotch, and pointed to the bottom of page 6. Did you or did you not initial clause 11C? She demanded. Gavin glanced down casually at the page, dismissing her intensity with a wave of his hand. Of course I initialed it. Julian insisted on adding some boilerplate transitional wording when we finalized the Q4 targets. I told him legal fine print did not concern me as long as he signed the revenue commitment. Why are you bringing this up now? Audrey took off her glasses and leaned across the desk, looking directly into his eyes. Because that boilerplate fine print, Gavin, is an accelerated payout trigger. Clause 11C explicitly states that if Julian Vance is terminated without documented, proven cause within 24 hours of an equity vesting date, the firm is contractually obligated to pay out his full performance bonus immediately. Gavin chuckled nervously, though his eyes showed his first flicker of doubt. So what? We terminated him today. The bonus was scheduled to vest tomorrow. He was no longer an employee when the vesting hour arrived. That voids the bonus. That is basic corporate policy. No, Gavin! Audrey shouted, her voice cutting through the executive suite like a blade. That is where your arrogance has ruined this firm. The clause specifically protects him against last-minute termination maneuvers. The act of firing him within that 24-hour window is what activates the clause. You did not cancel his $4 million bonus, Gavin. You triggered an automatic acceleration clause that mandates a 2x multiplier on the payout, plus base salary continuation, plus statutory interest. Gavin froze, the glass slipping slightly in his hand. What are you speaking about right now? What multiplier? Audrey picked up the paper and read the text aloud with brutal precision. In the event of bad faith or constructive termination within the protected window, the subject shall be entitled to 200% of the total equity bonus value, equivalent to $8 million, alongside statutory damages under Delaware corporate law governing the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. Furthermore, Audrey continued, Julian Vance has already submitted verified copies of this document, complete with your digital metadata and notarized signatures to legal compliance. He timestamped his submission 37 minutes after Valerie Thorne handed him his termination notice. He has effectively boxed us into a corner where any attempt to fabricate cause will be prosecuted as fraudulent inducement and retaliatory discharge under federal and state employment statutes. Gavin dropped into his chair, his face drained of color as the mathematical reality settled in his mind. He had tried to save $4 million, and in doing so, he had created an immediate financial liability exceeding $6,500,000. Get Valerie in here right now. Gavin gasped, his voice cracking. "Get her in here immediately." By 2 o'clock that afternoon, an emergency session of the board of directors had been convened in the main boardroom on floor 50. The atmosphere inside was suffocatingly tense. Board Chair Elliot Cross sat at the head of the table, flanked by Senior Director Lyle Henderson and the Audit Committee members. Gavin Henderson and Valerie Thorne sat at the far end of the table, looking like criminal defendants awaiting sentencing. Lead General Counsel Audrey Montgomery stood at the digital presentation board, displaying high-resolution scans of Clause 11C alongside verified corporate email metadata. "Let me summarize the situation for the board," Audrey stated, her voice resonating across the room. At 9:15 this morning, Vice President Valerie Thorne, with the explicit authorization of CEO Gavin Henderson, executed a summary termination of senior strategist Julian Vance. The stated reason was organizational restructuring. No prior warnings, performance notes, or cause documentation existed in his file. Audrey tapped the screen, highlighting the timestamp on the termination notice. This action was taken less than 23 hours before Mr. Vance's contractually mandated $4 million equity bonus was scheduled to vest. Mr. Vance had recently delivered 12 consecutive quarters of positive revenue growth and closed the $28 million Hastings deal. Elliot Cross leaned forward, his brow furrowed in deep anger. "Gavin, why was this termination executed without prior review by legal compliance or the board compensation committee?" Gavin cleared his throat, trying to regain his executive composure. "Board Chair Cross, we were attempting to protect shareholder value. We determined that Mr. Vance's ongoing compensation structure was unsustainable under our new operational budget. We believe that terminating the contract prior to the vesting timestamp would absorb the bonus obligation back into general reserves." "Absorb it back?" Elliot Cross echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. "Did you read his employment contract addendum before authorizing this action?" Valerie Thorne spoke up, her voice trembling violently. "I signed the implementation memo in December, but we were rushing to finalize headcounts. I assumed legal had reviewed every clause. I did not realize Julian had embedded an accelerated multiplier." "You initialed every single page, Valerie," Audrey interjected firmly, bringing up a high-resolution image of page 6 on the screen. "Here are your initials, verified by digital audit logs at 2:43 p.m. on December 14th. Mr. Vance even sent an accompanying email explicitly highlighting Clause 11C in bold underline. You replied to that email with the words 'approved as written.'" A heavy, oppressive silence settled over the boardroom. Senior Director Lyle Henderson turned to Audrey. "Audrey, what is our legal standing if Mr. Vance pursues litigation?" Audrey turned off the screen and looked at the board members with absolute seriousness. "We have zero legal standing. In fact, our position is catastrophically vulnerable. Under Delaware General Corporation law, every executive contract carries an implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. Terminating an executive specifically to deprive him of earned equity compensation constitutes bad faith breach of contract. Furthermore," Audrey continued, "because they failed to provide statutory notice under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, codified under Title 29, United States Code, Section 2101, we are exposed to mandatory statutory penalties. Clause 11C explicitly stipulates that arbitration is waived at the employee's sole discretion and mandates full legal fee indemnity. If Mr. Vance takes this to public court, the discovery process will expose internal emails proving that Gavin and Valerie deliberately schemed to evade his bonus. The reputational damage to Archon Financial will be immense, and our stock price will plummet. What is the financial liability?" Elliot Cross demanded, tapping his pen hard against the table. "Our preliminary audit indicates that the base bonus of $4 million, combined with the contractual acceleration multiplier, base salary continuation, and accrued interest, brings the immediate settlement baseline to $6,586,250, Audrey reported. "That is over $2,500,000 more than the original bonus obligation." Gavin slumped back in his leather chair, staring blankly at the floor. He had set out to display his cost-cutting prowess to the board, and instead he had engineered the single largest avoidable financial liability in the firm's history. "Can we offer him a partial settlement?" Gavin muttered weakly. "Offer him $2 million under a strict non-disclosure agreement?" Audrey looked at him with profound disdain. "Gavin, Julian Vance wrote Clause 11C while recovering from pneumonia 3 years ago. He is 10 steps ahead of you. He has already filed his documentation with external counsel. He does not need to negotiate with us. He holds an airtight contract, verified metadata, and a complete record of your misconduct. He is not asking for a settlement. He is enforcing a guarantee." Elliot Cross stood up from the head of the table, his face stern and unforgiving. "Gavin Henderson, Valerie Thorne, you are both relieved of your operational authority immediately pending a formal board investigation. Audrey, open direct communication with Julian Vance's external counsel. Settle this matter fully, satisfy every clause requirement, and ensure this company avoids a public legal execution." By 4 o'clock the following afternoon, I was sitting on the private terrace of a quiet executive hotel overlooking the downtown skyline. The afternoon sun cast a warm golden light across the city, and a gentle breeze rustled the palm leaves surrounding the balcony. I was enjoying a cup of dark roast coffee, completely detached from the corporate panic, shaking the executive suites of Archon Financial 4 blocks away. My personal phone pinged with an incoming encrypted email notification. The sender was external legal counsel, acting on behalf of the board of directors of Archon Financial. Attached to the message was a formal, executed settlement and release agreement, alongside a bank wire confirmation notice. I opened the document and scrolled directly to the financial transfer verification. Transaction amount, $6,586,250.00. .tie. Completed and cleared into designated personal trust account. There was no public announcement, no press conference, and no corporate spin. Archon Financial quieted the storm the only way they could, by paying every single dollar mandated by Clause 11C. Within 48 hours of the board session, the internal fallout at Archon Financial was absolute. Vice President Valerie Thorne submitted her immediate resignation, citing personal reasons on the corporate intranet. Everyone inside the building understood that her resignation was a forced corporate execution to prevent further internal exposure. As for CEO Gavin Henderson, the board stripped him of all operational control and reassigned him to a newly created advisory title, Executive Liaison for Internal Alignment. He was moved to a windowless basement office with no staff, no budget, and no corporate authority, serving out his remaining contract in total obscurity. Meanwhile, news of how I had dismantled Archon's executive betrayal with a single contract clause spread rapidly through high-level financial circles. Before the week was over, I received direct phone calls from senior partners at 3 major private equity firms. Among them was Westridge Capital, a premier investment firm that offered me an immediate managing partner position with full strategic autonomy, equity participation, and a seat on their investment committee. They were not hiring me merely for my deal-making track record. They were hiring me because I had demonstrated absolute legal mastery and unyielding strategic discipline under pressure. As I sat on the terrace reviewing Westridge Capital's partnership proposal, I pulled up my phone contacts and located the private mobile number of board chair, Elliot Cross. I typed a brief, single-line text message, refer to Clause 11C, line 22. Line 22 was the closing sentence of the addendum I had drafted years ago. It stated, "Failure by the employer to honor the terms herein shall constitute not only a material breach of contract, but a systemic lapse in corporate governance, subject to full financial restitution and reputational consequence." I hit send, placed my phone back on the table, and took another slow sip of my coffee. Gavin Henderson and Valerie Thorne had believed they could build their corporate empire on my dedication, and then discard me the moment my success became expensive. They had played a game of corporate intimidation, relying on arrogance, deceit, and positional authority. But they had forgotten one fundamental truth of high-stakes business. True power does not lie in titles or mahogany offices. True power lies in foresight, precision, and the courage to embed your protection in plain sight. I had not burned down Archon Financial. I had simply left them with the precise consequences they had signed for, collected every dollar I was owed, and walked away into a far brighter future.